The rise of nationalism in Europe, international security's biggest threat. I want to start this presentation and briefing by going back in time to almost part one of nationalism and fascism in Europe, all the way back to the early 20th century and before that. Welcome to Europe's greatest dictators. Napoleon is kind of on and off about being a dictator, but he was still hell-bent on conquering the world. These other three, though, Francisco Franco, Benito Mussolini, and Adolf Hitler, were the leaders of radical nationalism and fascism in Europe in the 20th century. Benito Mussolini became the first with ambition of reviving and rising Italy to the likes of the Roman Empire. He took power in 1924 and started securing power and land around the Mediterranean and Africa. Francisco Franco, a nationalist general who overthrew the government during the Spanish Civil War and took power in 1939, lasted his empire until 1975. And lastly, everyone knows who Hitler is, the leader of the Nazi Party and Axis powers, and started the worst conflict known to man. In the end, they all fell, every single one of them. Napoleon had lost at Waterloo, Mussolini lost Italy in a matter of months, Hitler shot himself in the fall of Berlin, and Franco died, but his successor Juan Carlos took control and transitioned Spain to democracy. After the fall of fascism in Europe, dictators would appear all over the world in the 20th century like Pol Pot, Kim Jong-il, and Saddam Hussein, but none would have the massive global impact that Mussolini and Hitler had. After World War II and the fall of the Axis powers, 12 years later, the EU was created. They were like a European version of NATO, making trades and more open borders between countries in Europe, as well as trying to keep the other countries in Europe in check. There's a problem with the EU, though. The article, Europeans must get rid of the failing EU one way or another, the polite Brexit way or the rowdy Yellow Vest way, specifically said that the process created a politically unaccountable bureaucracy, whose broad policy and directions are set by the consensus among the national heads of a government and cabinet ministers. The EU has the ability to, quote-unquote, punish other countries if they misbehave. The problem is how. How are they going to punish that country?
Peace is bringing authoritarianism back to Poland and openly rebelling against the European Union. It's a shocking turn for a country that just a few years ago was hailed as one of Europe's most promising young democracies. Happen, and can it be stopped?
How would they enforce that? Long story short, they can't. And if I was the leader of a radical nationalistic party, why'd I care what committee and organization like the EU said or told me what to do? Why would I care about it at all? I wouldn't. In a thesis written by Professor Vernon Bogdanar, he called Legitimacy, Accountability, and Democracy in the European Union, he wrote, "The European Union has not yet found a way of offering its citizens the reassurance that those who make decisions are accountable to them. The EU can't hold anyone accountable, really, and the exclusivity and the false sense of power that the EU has been in decline ever since they lost their biggest and probably most important member in Britain. And with the US under the Trump administration, the US hasn't been involved with the EU as much as it used to be." This brings me to my next slide, where we talk about some of the new leaders of these European countries. In Poland, the new president nearly won, Andrzej Duda, a very nationalist and right-wing leader. On NPR, they wrote an article about Duda's re-election, stating, 2 years ago, the European Parliament declared that the situation in Poland represents a clear risk of a serious breach of EU values, including the rule of law. The vote triggered an inquiry that could ultimately lead Poland to losing its voting rights in the European Council. In other words, Poland is doing some very shady stuff, but they don't care. Why would they? Hitler didn't care about marching into the Rhineland and Czechoslovakia, and Caesar didn't care about marching past the Tribune. Why should Duda care either? Nationalism is also popping up everywhere in Europe. Marine Le Pen and Matteo Salvini in Italy are not just leaders too, but political parties as well that have had Nazi ties and ex-Nazi leaders in the past, like the FDO in Austria. An article written in the DW said that the FDO was chaired by a former Nazi functionary and SS officer more than 60 years ago named Anton Rheintaler. The Freedom Party of Austria has taken a more controversial path through the decades. In this slide, I wrote an almost jokingly matter of the formula of how nationalistic parties, or any party for that matter, takes control of a government. But right now, I have highlighted steps 2, and I should honestly highlight step 3 because it seems that a lot of these new parties have not only gotten into the government, but have actually realized that these actually realized parties have gone on to step 3 and started winning elections like Duda and Marine have done, and so has Salvini. It's easy to spread these ideas to people, and when they win elections and have a good enough base, they can make bold moves that work just like all the other dictators did before them. This brings us to the ending of this video. For the last part of this video of the new rise of nationalism in Europe, I want to imply my opinion and idea of what could or would potentially happen. And that is that the free world will always fight fascism. I don't think that there will ever be a time, especially now, that nationalism and fascism rules the world. The reason it's a threat for international security is because of looking back at the past. 80 years ago, World War II was in full swing, and by the end of it, the world lost more than 72 million people. And what we saw was some of the most brutal and savage parts of war. If history repeats itself, then with the new military technology and abilities that have been made, an actual conventional war would potentially be devastating. How many more lives need to be lost to beat back the darkness that comes with fascism? And the US and Britain and France would and will always fight the evil cloud of fascism and would never let it reign over the world or Europe for that matter. But if it's beaten or not, fascism is returning. Madeleine Albright, the former US Secretary of State and herself a child of fascist Europe, writes that fascism poses a more serious threat now than at any time since the end of the Second World War. And the New York Times' Michael Goldberg said it's already here. That is international security's biggest threat. People replaying history and the history of fascism and nationalism. JFK said that it is an unfortunate fact that we can secure peace by only preparing for war. Maybe to secure international peace, we should start preparing. Thank you very much for watching my film. I hope you really enjoyed it.